Thanks everybody for coming out today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Toni Walton. I am the owner of Avery's Acres in Blind Bay, where we raise chicken, pork, and turkey. I am also the manager of Buckerfield here in Salmon Arm. So on behalf of Buckerfield, we'd like to thank you for coming out today for all a series of talks over the weekend. Here we have Shelley Work. She is the owner of Ravenwood Acres out in Silver Creek, along with her husband Brent here in the audience. Thank you, Brent. And Shelley is somebody who not only do I work with at the store, but I consider her to be my mentor. So everything I have learned, for the most part, I have learned from her. So we have decided today to do this presentation together. And I've been here at the fair all weekend, so Shelley has put together the entire presentation. So thank you very much for doing that. Okay. So we're gonna start about, first point is raising backyard chickens. So we're calling it Backyard Chickens 101. And we're gonna start by discussing why to raise backyard chickens.
I'm going to make some assumptions that anybody in the audience has an interest in raising backyard chickens. So why do you want to raise backyard chickens? Eggs? Yeah?
Food.
Yeah?
A learning experience for the kids.
Good, yeah. Learning experience for the kids. Anything else?
Yeah.
Fertilizer, absolutely. Yeah, hey, you guys are pretty good. Backyard Chickens 102 is on the horizon. So, as we've just discovered, there are a lot of benefits to raising backyard chickens. Eggs and meat are usually the primary reason that most people start with backyard chickens. To compost their shells and manure for the garden to provide fertilizer. They can help control insects in your backyard. Utilizing your kitchen scraps instead of just putting them in the compost, or for things that chickens can't eat, they will turn your compost for you. They make lively and entertaining pets. So nobody mentioned that, interestingly enough. To teach children responsibility. Sometimes you don't want a house pet, so chicken makes a good option because they're an outdoor animal, primarily. What else we got here? And they can really help with cleaning up your garden at the end of the season as well. And another thing that wasn't mentioned, which is kind of interesting, with the local drive towards food sustainability. Keeping your own chickens, it's a small part, but it's a part nonetheless. All right, things to consider when you're getting chickens.
Local bylaws. Now this is something that is ringing true very much so in Salmon Arm right now. We have brought a petition with us, and we have got 3 pages worth of signatures already here at the fair. We've been doing this at the store for the past about 3 weeks to a month now. Currently the bylaws, they are old bylaws, but they are still in effect, and currently you have to have over half an acre in order to raise hens for eggs. I think it's also for honeybees and ducks and geese and all those sorts of critters that really don't make too much noise, turkeys. Maybe we could understand not having a rooster in your backyard, but I think that everybody should be able to grow their own food, whether it be eggs or meat, and, you know, share with your neighbors. So we do have a petition here, so if any of you would like to sign it, we would really appreciate it. We will leave it up here, and when the presentation's over, please feel free to do so.
All right, so obviously local bylaws, as Toni has indicated, are going to influence whether or not you can have chickens in your backyard. Our hope is that we can change that. You also have to pay attention to your building ordinances. So if you're going to build a coop and a run, you need to make sure that you're going to set it back far enough from the property line so that you're not imposing on those ordinances. It's important because you don't want to go to all the trouble to do it and then have to remove it or move it. You need to evaluate your time and availability in order to determine whether or not you have the time to be able to care for your chickens properly. And they do take some time. They don't take a lot of time. They're one of the easier things that you can look after, as say compared to a puppy who needs to be house trained and leash trained and people trained and everything else. Chickens are pretty easy as far as the care is concerned. Your affordability for your outset costs is also important because you're going to have to build them a house. Doesn't have to be an extravagant house. It can be just a little house. You can use pallet wood. You can use scrap wood. You can even purchase one already made. We'll get into that a little deeper further on. But all of that does incur some cost. And then you have ongoing costs, which we'll also cover. Daily egg collection. It's important. If you got chickens for eggs, you better go out and get the eggs. Chicken sitter. A lot of people take a vacation. They don't think when they get their chickens, oh, this is great, we get eggs every day. Oh crap, we're going away for 2 weeks. Who's going to look after the chicken? Who's going to clean up the crap? So just a few things to think about. You are going to have manure, compost, bedding, and crop, chicken crop. That you're going to have a place to put when you clean out your coop. So you have to think about where you're going to put that. If you've got a garden already, chances are you've got some sort of compost already in progress. Works great for that. And replacement hens, when your hens start to age out. It's getting a little further down the line, but it does cost. So that's why I put it in here. And sometimes, despite our best attempts, chickens get sick or injured. Or when you bring in a new bird that's not a baby chick, for instance, you're going to want to implement some biosecurity processes. So you're going to need a small area where you can quarantine a bird. All right, so, Toni, how much space do chickens need? You don't have to know that off by heart, Toni.
I know.
Because there are chicken coop size calculators online. But, for the record, it's generally 2 to 4 feet per chicken of floor space in your coop. So if you wanted 4 chickens, and you times that by 4, you need a coop that's going to have floor space of about 16 square feet, right? You can lower the amount of coop floor space somewhat if you provide them with a run. So if your chickens are going to spend all their time in the coop, which probably they aren't, you can have a bigger coop. But if you're going to provide them with a run, which is ideal for chickens, then you can reduce the amount of floor space that you need in your coop. So you could go down to, say, 3 square foot per chicken per coop, which works just fine because a lot of the products that you can purchase pre-made, if you were interested in that, are fairly small and have a really little footprint in your yard. Easy to integrate, easy to attach a run around and covered over. But a lot of people like to build their own so they can customize it and maybe match their house and, you know, put a bay window in the front and that kind of thing. Now, the coop is important, and it is brought up here because you do need to make sure that your chickens have enough space. Your coop actually dictates how happy your chickens are because they do spend a fair bit of time in there. As I mentioned, a large run, spaced free range, can influence your coop size and actually makes for happier chickens if they've got a run. Average chicken needs 2 to 4 square feet, and your run should be about 8 to 10 square feet per bird. It's important that you build your coop to be efficient for the chickens, as well as for yourself. If your coop is too big, say you built it for 10 chickens, and you only have 3 chickens, those chickens are going to be a little chillier in the winter without their extra cohorts to keep them warm. Chickens are like little furnaces. They're crazy as far as how much heat they consume. But anyways, we don't necessarily want to encourage you to have 10 chickens, or do we?
That's right, chicken math.
Oh, somebody knows about chicken math already. Oh, you're way ahead of me on these slides here. And a coop that's too small causes overcrowding of chickens. So if you've got a coop built for 10 chickens and you've got 20 chickens, you could get some bullying going on. Somebody's not going to get a spot on the roost. So you got to pay attention to things like that. Also, when you're overcrowding birds, they produce way more manure and it can cause disease. So you need a place for your chicken activities. Chicken activities. Does anybody know what chickens do?
You know what chickens do? I know what a lot of chickens do. Chickens do what they want to. Chickens do what they want to. Yes. They go where they want to. They sleep where they want to. What's that? Yes.
Yeah. So chickens like to spread their wings a bit. Even though they don't fly, they still do use their wings frequently. They like to jump up on things, so you can provide some enrichment. They like to take dust baths, and in fact, dust baths are not just fun for chickens, they're actually imperative for chickens. They help you keep parasites and things down. So it's important that they have a space that they can dust bath. They like to catch the sun rays. If you've ever seen a chicken out there, oh, I should have got a picture of that. They love anywhere that they can dust bath, including your plant pots, including your garden, including your ash pile if you have a fireplace or something. And they're just hilarious when they do it because they flap their wings on the ground so that they get the dust in their feathers. And it's quite comical. And then they lay there soaking up the sun. And you look out your window and you go, oh my God, what's wrong with my chicken? Is it dead? Because it's not moving. They love to scratch in the soil, of course. Everybody knows what chickens like to do, right? And they also pick up rocks and grit. Now, I don't know how much you know about chickens. Probably not much because you're at Chickens 101. But chickens eat little rocks. They eat rocks, they eat grit, they eat sand, and it helps them digest their food in their gizzard, which is what you'll see, a big lump on the side of their neck sometimes after they've eaten a lot. So the space must be fenced in order to keep your chickens in and your predators out, and you definitely don't want to keep, well, you don't want to allow those predators in. So when you're building your run, it's important to cover it as well and make sure that you use good wire. You want to do some chicken terminology? Sure.
As far as fencing and keeping your chickens in, you can go that way 110%, and I do recommend it. However, we used to keep all of our chickens, we have 2 separate chicken coops, and we used to keep them in their run, so they would go in their coop at night, they'd be allowed in their run during the day, but we have since decided that we are going to allow our chickens out free in the yard. So we have to keep in mind that there is a potential for predators. We've had a few instances, but I do feel that my birds are a lot healthier, being able to roam around my yard, eat the grass, find their dust baths. They go out into the forest and they always come home at night. So you kind of have to, make your own choices. We've been doing this for probably 2 years, letting them go out and free range. And we just recently had a couple of problems. So just keep your eye on it if that's the way that you're going to choose to raise your chickens. And obviously it also depends how much yard space you have as well. So.
Yeah, yard space is probably one of the key points there for sure. And whether or not they're supervised at the time. So we're talking backyard chickens, so you know, if you're in that arena where you have a small city lot, and hopefully we can get chickens in there soon. That's just something to consider. So we have a bit of chicken terminology for all you noobs out there. And I'm going to hand this over to Toni.
Maybe we should ask them if they know the definition. We'll jump ahead. Well, first of all, we have Coop up here, so we can all see this. A coop is where the chickens live. You're putting the answers up before they can.
I can't help it, it's on the slide.
And we've just discussed a run. So a run is a secure area attached to a coop where chickens can do chicken things safely while unsupervised. There's your notes there, Shelley. Can anybody tell me what the difference between free range, free run, and pasture raised is?
Silence.
Anybody? You have no clue, Brent? Okay. So chickens who are not confined to a small caged area, and the definitions vary a little bit. A lot of people pasture raise their chickens in chicken tractors so that they can still protect their birds, especially if they're out in an open area. And I think we're going to get into chicken tractors a little bit later, so we can discuss that more.
You'll hear the terms free ranged and free run often when you're purchasing eggs from the store. Free range used to mean chickens who just roamed around, but then the commercial ones got into it, and it means something different when you're buying a free range chicken egg than it does if you're just letting your chickens run out in the pasture. But you'll hear those terms a lot, and it basically, the general gist of free range, free run, or pasture raised is pretty straightforward, but free run and free range just means that they're not in a little battery cage where they lay their eggs. They have more room than that. Okay?
Here's another question for you. Oh, anybody know anything about biosecurity? Was that a head nod? Okay.
It's knowing what comes in and what people or other animals are bringing into your area, as in bad stuff, bugs and everything.
Right. Oh.
So our audience member here just indicated that biosecurity is being aware of what comes in and out that could affect your birds, health-wise, right? That's right. Yes, Toni says, case in point, the avian flu that we just experienced, where flocks were told to stay on lockdown if they can, or be undercover. So wild birds, primarily ducks, because ducks and waterfowl are primary carriers of influenza, couldn't poop over your chicken's pen and inadvertently give them AI.
Okay, does anybody know anything about what a heritage bird is? Okay. Pop it up on the screen. So heritage birds, it refers to recognizable breeds that have been around a long time, are non-hybrid, genetically stable, naturally mating, and outdoor hardy breeds, and have been proven valuable for generations. Now, Shelley here is a professional at heritage breed chickens. I think you pretty much solely raise heritage breed chickens, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, I do raise heritage breeds, and these are the ones that have come from various countries these, but they're the ones that, you know, grandmas and grandpas had on their farms for decades, and raised them up. They'd let them lay, and they'd butcher them for stew, and so on and so on. They have a slightly longer lifespan. They have more productivity as far as how long they lay, and they just a lot of variation in how they appear. So you can get poofy cheeks and feathered feet and great big chickens and little leg layer chickens and different colored eggs. That's right.
So commercial refers to hybrid birds developed specifically for egg-laying production or meat production. So these are going to be, for meat birds, they're going to be your standard broilers, ready to go 8 weeks. Some people even do them as early as 6 weeks, I believe, 6 to 8 weeks. Obviously, the longer you keep them, the bigger they're going to be, but you also run the risk of them dying. They're very susceptible to heart attacks. I raise broilers as my meat birds, and last year had huge success with them. I only lost a couple, even during that massive heat wave we had. We actually made a tarp slip and slide through the chicken pen, and they all spent their days in the tarp underneath the water, and they were there with the turkeys too, and that's what they spent their days doing in that 50-degree temperature. So that was rather interesting. And then we move on to dual purpose. So dual purpose is useful as an egg layer when young and stew birds when done. So a lot of the time at Buckerfield, we'll use for an example, we sell dual purpose sexed birds at the store as day-old chicks. And a lot of people think, oh, dual purpose, perfect. If I'm gonna raise it up and it's gonna be for meat. Now, what's meant with a dual purpose is you're going to let it live out its egg-laying life, and then you can utilize the bird for soup or, you know, your stewing bird. So that's the idea with a dual purpose bird. No. Right, they are not as tender as your meat birds, and they're not going to be as meaty at all. They're definitely they don't have as big a breast as a broiler does, but they still have really good flavor. So. Absolutely. Bonnie just said excellent stock. It's great. Oh, we're moving on to more chicken terminology.
Almost done.
Okay. So a chick is a newly hatched chicken. Does anybody know what a pullet is? Oh, Shelley. Okay. A pullet is a young female chicken under 1 year. What's a cockerel? She says that's the rooster. The young male under 1 year. Anybody for point of lay?
A point of lay chicken is a pullet who is just about ready to lay. And that is typically, for backyard chicken keepers, what we recommend they start with. You don't have a whole bunch of extra equipment for incubating or brooding baby chicks necessarily. So if you can find point of lay chickens, you already have them to that stage of development where you can put them right into your coop and wait for that first egg.
So that's how I started off with chickens. I got 8 chicks from Shelley. So they didn't have to, meet up with my existing chickens because I didn't have any. But it was very exciting for us because, we get all excited and we get the run built and we do all these things, and then the chickens come and they hide on you for a few days and they don't want to socialize, and eventually they start coming out into their run, and then all of a sudden there's an egg. Which is absolutely thrilling when you've never had chickens before. I came from the city.
All right, we got a few more terminologies for you. Real quick, hen, female chicken that's laying, so she's about a year old already. A cockbird, yes, a cock bird. I put bird behind it because people don't like the word cock. Or you could call them a rooster, which is also correct, but it is slang. The official term for a male bird over a year is cockbird. Standard or large fowl? That sounds kind of self-explanatory. Basically, those are regular-sized chickens. And for those of you who didn't know, chickens also come in bantam sizes. Those are itty-bitty chickens. They're usually less than half the size of a regular chicken, and they are cute as a button. Yes, they lay smaller eggs. And molting. Does anybody know what molting is now that I've told you? Periodic feather loss that occurs annually with chickens. We get questions at Buckerfields so frequently. Why is my chicken losing its feathers? Why? I don't understand. What's wrong with my bird? So we explain it to them. We'll go into that a little bit further ahead. And the last chicken term for you is chicken math. And I love this description. The curious and incomprehensible process by which a flock of 5 backyard chickens grows to become 35 or 52 in 3 years. Toni's guilty.
What's next?
Okay. How many chickens? The next question is always, how many chickens should you get? So you've already determined, yes, I'm going to build a coop. Here's my space. I know it's not overriding any ordinances, and yes, Salmon Arm finally came into the, what century are we in? And allows backyard chickens. So now how many do you need? How many chickens do you need? Your local bylaw may be the determining factor on that. So for those that are over a half acre, how many can they have, do you know? 10? Yeah, that's what I thought. 10 chickens, but that includes ducks or other species as well. So you need to plan to keep at least 3 to 6 birds so that you've got a steady supply of eggs. But also because chickens are social animals. They don't like to be by themselves, and you know, if you get 2, one might pick on the other. If you get 3, 2 might pick on the other, but they're less likely to do that. So we usually recommend 3 to 6 chickens for a steady supply of eggs. Most chickens are the most productive in the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. We were talking about heritage versus commercial earlier. Commercial chickens are generally bred to lay like crazy, 300 eggs in the first year of their life. But then their production drops drastically over the next couple of years. Heritage chickens do not lay as many eggs in the course of their first year, maybe 200, 265, but they continue laying along that line for a few years before they start to drop off. So there's benefits to both. You need to think about replacing your flock with younger birds eventually. One idea that I've heard from people is staggering the ages of their birds. So if you were deciding to keep 6 chickens, you'd get 3, maybe in the spring, and then you get 3 more, a little bit younger, later in the fall. And that way those young ones, they're still in their first year, they're not going to be affected as much by a fall molt or something like that. So you're going to have eggs going through that season. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper later because yes, chickens do stop laying eggs in the winter. Chicken math is real. Toni can attest. Okay, here's a good one.
Sure. How much does chicken keeping cost? So initial cost $300 to $1,000 or more. That includes your materials to build or furnish or purchase a coop and a run, but like Shelley mentioned earlier, you can use materials you have at home, you can use pallet wood. We were lucky enough that we had an old shed on our property that we converted to our first chicken coop. You will also need to really consider the wire and hardware. Hardware cloth comes in key if you're trying to keep predators out. You're gonna dig it, I think, how many inches deep if you want to protect it in the run? 3 to 5 inches. There are weasels around here and they can be very destructive to your chickens. So you really want to make sure that they're protected that way. It may also include concrete or gravel, the cost of the birds, and the price of birds depends on what kind of birds you get. If you're getting your birds sexed, it costs more. If you're vaccinating your birds, it costs more. If you're getting heritage breeds, they cost more. So you can shop locally, you can buy through a hatchery, but everybody will have sort of varying prices. Which is the next point anyway. Varies depending on flock size and design. And there's also ongoing costs. The price of feed. Feed costs are going up just like anything else. Regularly. Average feed, most people buy their feed in 20 kilogram bags. Of course, you can always buy it if you have a larger amount of birds by the ton, if you have somewhere suitable to store it. You will need the occasional bags of grit or calcium supplements like oyster shell. Shavings and bedding pellets for bedding. Some people also use straw. I prefer shavings myself, it's just easier to clean up. Some people also want to put some sort of absorbent in there, like a stall dry underneath. It keeps it drier and cleaner. I use that definitely over the winter months, especially because they are in their coop a little bit more than they are outside. Hydro to light and or heating in the winter. Chickens are pretty resilient, but they do get cold, especially when the temperatures really drop. If you don't have, you really ideally want to have an insulated coop. Coop maintenance. You have to fix things, you know, even in the second coop that we built, you know, my husband just went out there and put some insulation in. We still have to maintain everything. And replacement birds. So there's always ongoing costs with chickens. And you like to buy them treats too.
So we did touch on building the coop a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there are lots of resources available online, but we will touch on a few key points here. So I'm just going to go through this fairly quick. What time do we have? Okay, we started a little late, so we're going to take a little leeway. Anyway, so building your coop. So it can be as simple as pallets and some plywood, or it can be extravagant. I've seen some coops that look like a little town, and they have these chickens running down the street, and it's just adorable. But you know, it's not necessary unless you have the time and the ability to do it. It has to hold a feeder and a water container, although some people do prefer to keep their feed and water outside in the run. And there is some logical reasoning for that. You don't want vermin in your coop, so you don't want moisture in your coop, because both of those things are not good for your chickens. You need to have a roosting area. It has to be big enough to house all of the chickens that you've got in that coop. So they need about 8 to 12 inches per chicken on that roost, and your roost needs to be about 2 feet off the ground. Now, I will mention that there are some breeds of chickens that don't like to roost, and some that like to roost higher, but they don't need to if they don't have to. But silky chickens, for instance, they have a different type of feather, and they have big poofy heads, feather heads that obscure their vision to some degree, so they don't jump up onto a roost, they prefer to pile. So as long as you've got a nice corner, preferably rounded off a little bit so nobody gets stuck in the corner and squished, and they can squish them. If you've got all 4 birds on top of one bird, it's probably not very comfortable. Nest box. You need one nest box for every 3 to 5 hens. 3, usually good. And they will all choose the same nest box, regardless of how many you have. I guarantee it. You'll have 3 hens in that one nest box at one time. Your coop needs to be convenient for you to clean and access for egg collection. So you're going to have to be in there on a regular basis cleaning the coop. So it's easiest if you can actually stand upright and use a shovel. You've got enough room to shovel. If not, then I suggest putting some sort of a door that you can just scoop it out through the back of your coop or something along those lines, just to make it easier, because some of those pre-purchased ones, they don't really have a lot of room in them, and you can't get in there to clean them. So you don't do it as often if it's awkward.
It's so much easier if you can walk in.
It's so much easier if you can walk in there. Even for us, like we have an old big garden shed, like I mentioned. I go in there with a push broom, push it out into the run, scoop it up, put it in the wheelbarrow, and off to the compost it goes. It just makes it so much easier if you yourself can maneuver in there. I couldn't imagine getting in one of those really cute little ones that you see, you know, in the catalog, and how are you supposed to get everything out there? It's terrible. Have you used those? Have you ever?
I've got a few coops.
I've got a few coops that I sort of threw together based on a doghouse. And of course, there's just one door. So, you don't want it down at ground level, because I ain't crawling on my hands and knees to clean that out. So you usually put it up on something, and it makes it a little bit easier. You can at least reach in and do this, with a rake or something, or your hand if you're so inclined. But yeah, definitely important to make sure that you can get in there to clean your coop. It's also pertinent to make sure that you have a coop door for the chickens. They can come in and out of a man door, sure, no problem. You can put a hole in the wall, they can come into there just fine. But there may be times when you want to shut them in the coop. For instance, maybe you got a hole in your fence, and a predator came in and took one of your birds, and you don't have a door on your coop. That predator's going to come back next night. No door on your coop. For those chickens, it's going to crawl right in there. So it's important to have a coop door that closes. A light source. If we have time, we'll get into the supplemental lighting. But it's important to either have a window or some sort of a timed light. And light is very, very important to chickens, because that dictates how many eggs they're going to lay for you. Your flooring materials should be easily cleaned. So if you got a scrap of linoleum to put down on your floor, by all means do it. It's going to keep it that much cleaner. Paint your walls instead of just leaving them plain wood. It seals off some of the smaller cracks that can house parasites. Yes. Insulation, while not necessary, can help keep your coop cool in summer and warmer and draft-free in the winter. Toni insulates her coop. I have a great big barn, but any of my smaller coops that I have are not insulated. So they do sometimes get a little drafty. Don't learn from me. Ventilation is the other very key component in your coop, along with supplemental lighting, as I mentioned. Ventilation allows air to go across the coop above your birds so that it draws moisture up and out. If you're relying on your coop door and your windows to do this, all you're doing is creating drafts for your chickens. It comes into the coop and it just kind of sits there. It might go through and cool them off if it's a hot summer day, but it's not doing what it needs to do. It needs to draw the moisture out, because moisture is bad for chickens. Moisture leads to ammonia. Ammonia leads to disease. All right? And again, make sure that you cover those openings with some hardware cloth or something so you can keep predators out. We talked about including a covered run. They don't have to stay in there all the time, like Toni said. She lets hers free range all the time. But it's a good place for them to go when they're not supervised. If you're not there, you don't know what's coming into your yard. Could be Fluffy from next door, could be Fido. Bye-bye chicken. Overcrowding, we talked about that already, how it can cause behavioral issues, and it creates faster buildup of manure, which means you have to clean more often, which means you have to spend more money on shavings, which means you have to get down on your hands and knees to clean out that dog house again. No, I'm just kidding, because you're not going to do that. Chickens are better with cool weather than they are with heat. So it's important to choose sort of a shady spot for your coop, maybe a little bit of morning sun coming in, just so that they don't overheat in there. And as we've mentioned several times, use a sturdy wire. The smallest holes that you can get possible are usually the best bet that you can afford, right? Chicken wire is great for keeping chickens in an area, but it is not predator proof. We do not recommend building coops with chicken wire or runs. Oh, that was my next point. I jumped ahead. Your coop and your run must be sturdy enough to keep your chickens from all the predators. And here are our predators. I don't know if you can see that. It's a bit of a fuzzy image, but yeah, it's a lot of predators. It is. Chickens are really susceptible to things like that. You know, we've got opossums, don't have that here, but crows and ravens, raccoons we have, owls, hawks, bobcats, foxes, dogs, cats, coyotes, snakes, minks and weasels, rats, and skunks. We got most of those. Yeah. And some of those hunt for fun. They come in and kill 4 chickens just because they can, not even take a bite off them. Yeah. So it's important to keep them safe with the best wire you can. They strike day or night. They return once they've discovered food. Some can enter through the tiniest little spaces that you would never imagine they could get through. Some jump, dig, or chew. And that includes your own, as I said, Fluffy or Fido. Okay, supplemental lighting, real quick. I know we're just about out of time. Your chicken's reproductive cycle is regulated by light, daylight in particular. Just like us, we have circadian rhythms, chickens have circadian rhythms, and it's all dictated by light. But we've evolved or something to the point where we don't have to pay as much attention to that for our reproductive needs. But chickens do. If you want eggs, you need to pay attention to your chicken's cycles. They may stop producing if you don't give them enough light. And windows are always the best bet, but you know, we live in northern Canada. Or no, not northern, but we live in Canada. That is northern. So you can use artificial light to supplement them. Chickens need 14 to 16 hours of light per day in order to produce an egg on a daily or nearly daily basis. So, use a low watt light. Put it on a timer if you can, and it's best if you can provide that light to them from early morning onwards rather than late evening into the night. Because chickens don't like it when that light suddenly goes off and they're not on their roost. They stand there scared and they can't move. And they'll call to each other, and eventually they'll find their way to each other, but they can't see to jump on their roost if they're not there already. Most chickens are pretty good about knowing when it's nighttime though. And even if you're providing them with supplemental light, they'll still take their cues from that window and get on that roost beforehand. But it's just nicer if they don't have to get scared first.
And just to add to that, like I mentioned before, my birds are outside in the yard. They know exactly what time to come home. They all come home to their respective coops every night, and that's it. I'm I count my birds. My husband thinks I'm crazy, but I count my birds. I go out there every night with a flashlight on my head and I check and I count all of them. And more often than not, almost 98% of the time, my chickens are up on their roost right before it turns completely black outside. So it definitely works. And as far as a timer goes, I use a timer. I just find a cheap one at the store, and it works wonderfully. And I always make sure that it's set a lot earlier in the morning than later at night.
All right, real quick. There's a little Coop gallery for you, just to show you a few ideas. Get your imagination rolling. There's even a few chicken tractors in there, you would see it. So the chicken tractor, for somebody who doesn't know, those are mobile coops. You may not want to keep your chickens in them all year round if they're not winter-proof. But for the summer months, they're fantastic because, as we said, the more you can get your chickens out into a clean environment, the better. I mean, assuming you're still cleaning the run in the coop and everything, but you know, they like to play in the grass and whatnot. Where to find chickens? So Toni touched on this a little bit earlier. Hatcheries have them, local producers, chicken hobbyists, poultry clubs and shows. You could try incubating your own, but that's a whole other ballgame. Facebook groups. Yes, there are lots of Facebook groups for this area and just for chickens in general. Kijiji or other classified services. Chicks at the feed store. They bring chicks in every year at Buckerfield.
Just gotta watch your timing on that. Spring till about August is when we bring them into the feed.
Advertisements at your local feed store from people who regularly meet there. Oh, okay, what chickens are best? Real quick. There are so many chickens. You wouldn't believe how many chickens there are. You could ask 100 different owners which chickens are best. You're going to get 100 different answers. First of all, define your goals. If your primary goal is, I want eggs, I just want eggs, I don't care about anything else, then you're going to look for egg layers. If you want friendly chickens, because you know your grandchild comes over regularly and wants to play with the chickens, you want to get friendly chickens. Or maybe you're a little artistic and you want fancy chickens. Well, there are fancy chickens. So commercial breeds like Leghorns, production reds, those are your most reliable layers. As we said before, they're going to give you about 300 eggs a year. Dual-purpose chickens like Columbian Rocks and Red Sussex, they can also be sexed as chicks, just like production birds can. So most of the time, you're not going to get a rooster. But sexing dual-purpose birds isn't 100%, so there is always an option that you might end up with one, which of course we don't necessarily want in backyards. So if you're going to get dual-purpose birds, then you're probably going to want to make sure you've got a plan in case you get a rooster. Because he will crow long before he's worth culling for the stew pot. You have a question? Okay. I don't think there are any transgender birds, but there might be. You have one? Oh, okay. Well, you know, if your neighbors object to a crowing hen, you might have a problem. But it's not laying eggs either. Soup pot. Like I said, you gotta have a plan for those roosters and transgender birds. Heritage breeds are usually considered dual purpose for the most part. They're usually relatively good layers, relatively hardy, but most cannot be sexed at hatch, with the exception of a few. There are some that contain, it's called the barred gene, and based on how they're bred, you sometimes can tell that they're girls. Some of them are sexable at hatch because of their color. The male has a different color than the female. So a little bit of research will yield which ones are which. You can choose more than one breed for variety and egg color. So just because, you know, you're only getting 3 chickens doesn't mean you have to get 3 the same. Come on, live a little. Right? Oh yeah, they'll get along with each other, even if they're a different type. The key is making sure they're roughly of the same size and same age when you put them together. Okay? Consider these points when you're choosing your chickens. Climate. Some birds do better in cold climates than warm. Temperament. You might want docile birds or bantams, best for children. Production ability, as we discussed. If all you're interested in is eggs, then get a production bird. If you want something that's a little more fun to look at, which isn't to say that production birds aren't fun, they certainly can be. Toni loves her Colombian rocks. Yeah, she calls them all sunshine. Oh, but now she loves her leghorns, see? Production, right? What else we got here? Egg color shouldn't be your first consideration, but who can resist blue, green, and pink eggs? I mean, come on. Or dark chocolate brown. Fancy breeds, not always the best layers, not always the most docile, but they sure are fun to look at for sake of entertainment. Here's a few chicken breeds. Here's your Colombian rock, barred rock. That's an Isa brown or a production red. Different hatcheries call them different names, but that's basically what they are. There's a leghorn. That is an Americana, blue splash Americana, in fact. They have puffy cheeks. They lay blue eggs. That is a bantam cochin. Just looks like a pile of feathers. They are fabulous broody chickens. So if you're not heating your coop in the winter, get one of these. She will sit on those eggs and keep them from freezing for you. There's Buff Brahma. Chanticleer. Did you know that the Chanticleer is Canada's only breed of chicken? And they are beautiful birds. Big, chunky birds, nice, well-tempered. Putting a dig in there for mine. Cream leg bar. This is one of those ones that can be sexed at hatch, even though it's a heritage breed. And they also lay a beautiful blue egg. There's a Buff Orpington. Always favorites with people. Nice big fluffy birds. Very friendly, very sociable. French black copper marrons. These are the ones that have those dark chocolatey brown eggs. But you got to be careful where you get them from, because not all lines have those dark eggs. Some are a little bit lighter, which is okay too, but if you want the brown ones. It's a blue laced red Wyandotte, also a nice friendly breed. There's Salmon Faverolles, one of my personal favorites. My logo is designed after Salmon Faverolles Roosters, so I'm not partial at all, am I? It's Rhode Island Red, good old favorite. Bet your grandparents had some of those. And there's a Polish, look at that head. Speckled Sussex, another good favorite. Make great stew birds when they're done laying too. There's your Silky. See how different those feathers are? Mottled Cerama. That's one of the smallest bantam birds. They're pretty teeny. Black Australorp is one of the bigger birds. It's like the Australian version of the Orpington. That is a Russian Orloff. And the smallest, Bantam Seabright. Those are probably more for pets than they are for laying. Caring for chickens. Yeah, I don't know how to turn it down, but I'll talk quieter. All right, you want to do caring for chickens real quick?
So caring for your chickens requires layer pellets, 16 or 18% protein. A lot of people this time of year are feeding a 16% protein, but they up their protein in the winter to an 18%. Treats should be 10% of the diet. Kitchen scratch, bugs. We carry a great product at Buckerfield. It's called Happy Chicken, and we cannot keep that one in stock. The chickens go nuts for it. Grit and calcium supplement, as I mentioned before, oyster shell. Should always have that available. I keep mine in just little mineral boxes attached to the wall inside the coop so they can eat it when they need it. Access to fresh, clean water at all times. We make sure that their water gets changed on a daily basis. Raise feeders at night to prevent vermin. As Shelley touched on earlier, we talked about whether to keep your feeders and waterers inside the coop or inside the run. So just be mindful of that. There are many types of feeders. It's based on personal preference. We have gone through numerous different types till we finally found one that worked. It's just going to depend on what works for you. If you have any questions, come on down to the store. We've got a huge selection of feeders and waterers, and we'd be glad to help you. And as mentioned, just like you're going to put in fresh water daily, you're going to clean your feeders and water regularly. We just keep a brush outside and we do a quick scrub when we're changing out the water and in the base too. You're going to inspect your birds regularly for parasites such as chicken lice and mites. I've been lucky enough to not have this so far, but I have checked them for just because I've had symptoms of it. There are options. Have a dust bath handy. That is a really key point. If you don't have an area for them, we do sell bags of dust bath that you can use. You can use diatomaceous earth. Deworm when required. Keep coop bedding clean or use deep bedding method. So if you haven't heard the deep bedding method, we're running out of time here, but basically you're layering fresh bedding on top of your old bedding, and typically I think they take it out twice, 2 to 3 times, no, once. Yeah, okay, I've heard twice, sometimes in the fall, sometimes in the spring, whatever works for you. Allowing for as much natural behavior as possible, create an enriched environment in the run. Give them something to do, like I know when we first got ours, we didn't let them go outside past their run, and my husband built some perches up there, used branches from around the property, that sort of thing. They've got stumps in there. There was an old hazelnut tree in there. They would jump up and bite the leaves off. It just find some things for them. You can even get little treat. Oh, mirrors. Okay. Another really good one. This, especially going into winter, it's high in protein. Just get a suet feeder, just a little square one, very inexpensive, and a block of suet. Chickens love suet, and they'll just peck at it. And allow birds on clean ground as much as possible. Oh, that's a good one. Gardening with chickens. Act as your cleanup crew at the end of the season to uproot remaining plants and eat any overripe produce. I have the opposite problem. They go in my raised beds right now. But that's our own fault for not fencing it in. She's speeding ahead. We're running out of time anyway. They'll eat weed seeds and insects they find in the soil. Oh, I should touch on this too. Everybody always talks about this invasive species, Japanese knotweed, and a lot of us have this on our property. If you're anything like me, you don't use pesticides, you don't use chemicals. Chickens love knotweed. Let them into your knotweed patch. They will eat it. It's a very high source of vitamin C, and they love it. Right now, we've got turkeys that are a couple weeks out from going in, and we just rip out the branches and put them in the turkey pen, and they gobble it up. It's absolutely incredible. They'll scratch and mix up the soil in the process. Great time to add last year's compost. Produce approximately 2 cubic feet of manure per year per chicken. Shelley said this to me the other day, and it kind of blew my mind. There are a wealth of...
It's an endless supply, let's just put it that way.
Yeah. There's a wealth of resources online for best practices in composting chicken manure. I get a lot of my information when Shelley's not available from YouTube. It's a great tool. When do chickens start laying eggs? A pullet begins laying eggs when she is around 20 weeks old. Some may start earlier. I have this case right now because we got some sexa lynx and we got some leghorns at the same time. They're exactly the same age, raised together. My leghorns have been laying eggs for a couple of weeks now, and the other ones haven't started yet. So hopefully I'll get some new brown eggs soon. Most reliably lay in their first 2 to 3 years. After that, egg production will taper. Most hens lay 1 egg per day, but weather, day length, nutrition, breed, or visits from predators may affect production. Laying is largely dependent on the length of the day, and many hens stop laying at receiving less than 12 hours of daylight, as we mentioned before. How long do chickens live? Lifespans vary widely, with most hens generally between 3 and 7 years. I have noticed I have lost a couple of my 3-year-olds, so I'm hoping the rest stick around for a while, but they seem pretty healthy. Those kept safe from predators, including dogs, and free from genetic issues can certainly live 10 to 12 years. Most chickens are not bred for longevity. Unlike other pets, there are few, if any, tests for genetic anomalies that don't require culling first. Blood tests can detect infectious diseases, but biosecurity is best for prevention. Why is my chicken naked? Why did my chicken stop laying eggs? I actually had no clue when I first looked out into my yard and saw my chickens missing feathers. And I said, Shelley, what's going on with my chickens? They're molting. Chickens need... Yeah, I think Shelley could probably go into a little bit better detail on molting birds.
Yeah, so molting is an annual process for most mature birds. It's not the only reason that chickens molt, though. Sometimes parasites will also cause molting. Sometimes their coop mates cause problems by pecking at their feathers. So you have to do a little bit of research sometimes, but always keep in mind the age of your chicken, because almost always they molt at the end of their first year. So here we have small amounts of feathers could be attributed to feather pecking or external parasites. Large feather loss is most commonly due to molting, which is a natural process that all the birds go through, as we said. And here's something interesting. The better a hen's production through spring and summer, often the more dramatic her molt. So she's used up a lot of all of her proteins and calcium to produce eggs all year, and she's done a good job of it. Now she gets the worst molt of all. How is that fair? Molting often occurs in conjunction with sudden lowered egg production. So a lot of people come into the store and they say, my chicken has stopped laying, I don't know, do I need to give her different food? What's wrong with her? I just can't figure it out. Is she molting? Oh, yeah, she does have sort of a patch on her neck that's missing and on her back. That's why. Fewer eggs can also be caused by stress or illness, so that's also something to consider. Also, the older a hen gets, the lower her production is, but usually she lays larger eggs. So it's just something to keep in mind for those older birds. So there's your annual molt. Look at that poor bird. It looks like a porcupine instead of a chicken. So decreased daylight is what triggers molting. As I've said before, the reproductive cycle is stimulated by light. Chickens need 4 to 16 hours per day in order to maintain their peak production. So if they stop getting that because sunlight's fall, and as we've all noticed already, it's dark in the morning, it's dark at night, a lot quicker. That's probably why. Temperature changes also can affect it. Drastic drops will shock the chickens, so they don't produce as well. And of course, molting, we already discussed. Did you know that molting takes 8 weeks to 16 weeks for loss and regrowth? So there's about 2 months right there where you're going to probably not have regular eggs from that one bird. Now that doesn't mean that, you can't keep them. Young hens usually resume laying once their molt is complete. Hens older than 3 years, you're going to start seeing their decline as far as egg production is concerned. So, as we said before, aging flock members, you're going to have to replace your birds eventually because they don't live forever and they don't produce forever. And it's important that we as chicken keepers take responsibility to make sure that we do the right things for these birds, just as you would for your pet cat or your pet dog or whatever the case may be. Your options when your chickens are no longer laying are to allow the older hen to contribute to your farm in other ways. So Maybe she's excellent at moving your compost around for you, or helping clean the garden up in the fall. If you've got the space, you can keep the hen. You may be attached to her, right? It's hard to make decisions when you have an emotional attachment to something. And this is where the meat section comes in of our description of this seminar. You can use that chicken as a stewing hen instead of an egg layer. So you would cull the bird and put it in the stew pot instead. I recommend taking the feathers off first, though. Or you can humanely dispose of the chicken in order to allow for a replacement bird in your flock. So even if you aren't thinking about considering offing one of your non-laying hens, at some point you're going to have to probably cull a chicken. So there's lots of resources online for doing that humanely and as painlessly as possible. And I hate to end on that note, so I thought I'd give you a cute chick picture with a hat and say thank you for joining us today. Sorry the last little bit was rushed, and hopefully you learned something.
Yeah.